Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We are so excited today. We have special guest Kim Kelley here with us. And Kim has a very unique story, and what she is doing with her experiences now is just so inspirational. And I think that you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. So let's dive in. And without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, we really appreciate you being on. We can't wait to hear your story. And as you talk to our listeners, we just are so excited. So I'll let you jump in. And again, you can just share what you want to share. We can't wait to hear.
Well, there's a lot to share. I'm not sure what direction you want to take this conversation, but I'll start with some background as far as why I'm here. So the short version is I was born and raised in an international religious cult. So we'll start there. Now, the word cult is pretty cringy, and it should be for a lot of reasons to people. But what we're going to focus on in this conversation is not what people assume, like, haha, a cult, that's creepy. Yes, cool. And there is a second generation of people born into and raised in these controlled environments that society does not fully comprehend the severity of that control, specifically the brainwashing and different manipulation tactics when used on children. So thoughts and prayers to every grown-ass adult who decided to do something kooky with their lives and continue doing something kooky every day of their lives. However, the children being born in and raised under these proverbial rocks do not get to choose and do not have outside advocacy or support to help them understand what's going on and how to get out of it. So I'm very passionate, as you can tell, about this whole cause, but also unpacking it in a way that the public can comprehend. Because again, it's not about telling my story or, this truth I need to get off my chest, as much as acknowledging that this is still an issue. Like point one, I can tell you about bad things that happened a long, long time ago, and it's very sad. However, what's not okay, what should not be okay with any of us, is what's still happening today on this massive scale in the United States of America. I'll tell you about how I've dedicated my life now to combat child exploitation and trafficking, working with law enforcement, implementing training programs, creating solutions that don't exist for ridiculous reasons, and then how intentional the problem is. So we'll get back to that. But to further explain, my childhood was 20 years of all kinds of cult abuse, including trafficking. So just to paint this not so nice picture, my parents are American. They decided to join a cult. They decided to have children and raised said children in this cult. So my siblings and I were born and raised all over the world. I was born in Brazil, and I was raised in Brazil and Mexico for the most part. So, we could unpack why kooky hippies think it's okay to raise a bunch of white girls in third world countries. But the real problem here, I got real dark humor about all this, by the way. That's not it's a disclaimer. But I do laugh and smile about some really dark things because that's my chosen form of feeling. That being said, also when you face this realm of corruption, it's so difficult to take it seriously that this is still a problem that people are unwilling to talk about. So the dark humor helps me cope, I guess you could say.
Yeah, we can relate to that, actually. There are times where we actually kind of laugh about what we've been through, right, Susie? And people are like, how can you laugh about that? But it's like you said, it's sort of like that's the way you choose to cope with it sometimes.
Absolutely. And so other survivors totally get it every single time. Service members also get it, and they're my people because we can sit around and talk about some dark things and just, anyway, know when it's appropriate to laugh and smile because it's always. Yeah. So all that to say, this international religious cult was also a Christian cult. Mm-hmm. Survivors of cults are not surprised by that, but a lot of well-meaning religious people are, because when they hear the word cult, they think something about Satanism. And unfortunately, 100% of the abuse was done in the name of Jesus and God and the Bible. Now, I'm mature and healed enough to understand that it wasn't Jesus and God in the Bible abusing 25,000 children. It was bad people using religion to control people, or basically abusing power. Okay. I can speak to different sides of the aisle about this issue. The irony is I can sing the Bible to you in 3 languages. So for those who are like, oh, you just need to read the Bible and that's how you'll heal, that's very cute. However, sometimes, often, when religion is used against people, it is a very powerful control mechanism. Also, as we continue unpacking these patterns of cults, I want people to think about how this might relate to the patterns that they see in society today. because believe me, these patterns are effective control tactics, specifically used to control people using fear to sell agendas.
Yeah, and they do that in a lot of churches. I know, Susie and we were raised independent fundamental Baptist. And so everything that you're saying, with the exception of we obviously weren't raised in Brazil and Mexico, but the same sort of things that you're saying, where it's like, oh my gosh, that's checking the boxes, right, for us as well. So we can relate. I am so curious, if you don't mind, can you tell us what cult this was?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I do a lot of public speaking and awareness and law enforcement training and different things. So I tailor the message to the audience. And generally when I'm speaking, I don't talk about the intricacies of the cult, because in general audiences, when I'm trying to spoon feed child trafficking is an issue, let's do something about it. Okay. People get all fixated on like what type of cult and all the creepy details. Sure, you guys have noticed this, but a lot of people in society are just there for the sensational details.
Sure. Yeah.
And the satisfaction of those things. However, for this conversation, let's get into it, because yes, let's talk about how religion is used to control and how bad guys get away with doing bad things under the name of yay God, yay Jesus. And there's a big difference between religious freedom, freedom of speech and all of those freedoms, and coercive control, and specifically child exploitation. So just real quick, for the purpose of this conversation, my focus is on protecting children. Not because adults are not sometimes innocent, often brainwashed, etc., but because there's a big difference between adults who decide to, for example, join a cult and stay in a cult, versus a child who knows nothing else, who is literally told the world is dangerous. If you go outside, you're going to get struck by lightning from God, or like just whatever culty stuff. Yeah. For further context, if anyone has studied cults, there are some cults that experts would agree are maybe the top 10 most notorious for really bad things happening to children. I don't know how direct I can be with my words here. I'm used to like censoring myself for social media platforms.
No, you can say whatever.
Yeah. So like all the bad things. So this cult started in the late 60s. It was some kind of Jesus people related something. It started as the Children of God.
Oh, I have heard of this. Yes. Okay. Yes.
And
didn't it start in California or
Huntington Beach, California? Yeah.
Yes.
Jesus movement, bunch of lost hippies, drugged out, founder, prophet guy, rescued these hippies. So let's unpack the coercion techniques here real quick, but also like how people fall for it and continue falling for it. So when there's this illusion of like, God saved me from this terrible, drug addiction or whatever, like lost, lonely people were doing back in those days, right? Then there trauma bond with the person who saved you. Then, so like look at Hitler's playbook, right? The way you manipulate people, you put in some truth with a lot of lies or whatever the ratio is there, but it often, increases the more you buy into those lies. But that being said, you throw in some God is love and God is yay, combined with all the weirdness they want you to consume and continue practicing, right? It's a very effective control mechanism.
Yeah.
Started as the Children of God. It later rebranded multiple times, as cults do when they're getting into trouble. They rename.
Right.
Then became the Family, and then the Family International. So fast forward till today, it's like some washed up, online church version of whatever, where you have to tithe, hear from God or something.
Of course you do. Send them your money.
Right. On the website, they're like, yeah, we're missionaries. The guys that we operated under were Christian missionaries. So a bunch of white ass people all over the world, like pretending to do missionary work, literally staging photos. Okay. It was really terrible. In addition to all the other cult weirdness, but that was the guise. So a big thing I speak about a lot is how, people hide under the guise of doing good, or the yay God, we're just practicing our freedom, so people leave them alone. There's a lot more to it, so we can continue unpacking that.
So I've heard of the Children of God, and there's a book called Sex Cult Nun that talks about it.
A lot of books and documentaries and
yes. Faith Jones, one of them, when you talk about like cults, I'm so glad that you are talking about the stuff that happened and like helping people be more aware. I hate that you've had times where you couldn't necessarily share more specifics about which cult it was, because what's interesting is I find that it was a Christian group, and where some people tend to think Christians will do what they do, meaning like the lowest common denominator. What some people think, like, oh, it's a church group. This is what I do at church, so this is what you do at church. But what they don't realize is that that's different for so many different people. And within your group, it was very intense in a different way of like reaching people to save them, right? Like you were right that the kids, I just want to give you a hug right now, because the kids like were so mistreated. So impressed you got out of this, like incredible.
You know, there were 2 reasons I did not suffer worse abuse as a child. So one is that I was just lucky to be born the last of my sibling lineup, and we all have like a bunch of siblings. It's all weird. It's fine. But the older second generation, so again, we're talking people who joined the group that had children, right? The second generation, the people born in like the 70s and early 80s. So my upbringing was basically night and day difference from that of my oldest sibling in terms of the intensity of abuse. And that is also because, first of all, it was easier to get away with bad things back in the day. Because around the time I was born, there was a series of international raids. So I believe it was like 92, 93. I was in Brazil at the time. The closest raid to us was in Argentina, right? Completely different country, same continent. The others were all around, like that was Australia, different places in Europe, etc. So enough people had escaped or left this cult and notified authorities and their family members and whoever, where there was a series of coordinated efforts to local law enforcement raided these compounds. For quick context here, we lived communally in compounds with like 100, 150 people and kids and all kinds of terrible things. So local authorities stormed these compounds, arrested the adults, and put the kids into institutions. Now, just quick pause there, because there's more to that story, but there's this misconception that when you see headlines about something children rescued, there's this misconception that just because a child is rescued means the child is safe. There's also a misconception that just because you're seeing someone filming the problem, that the problem is being solved. I want to note that there were lots of people who filmed documentaries. There was Larry King Live and 60 Minutes and all kinds of different pretty large media type exposés on what was happening. And there was this series of international raids. Unfortunately, that was not helpful for the children who were experiencing that trauma. So to further paint that picture, while I give the benefit of the doubt that these local authorities did not know what to expect inside these compound walls or how many children, and were not necessarily set up to protect and house and feed said children, a lot of children suffered worse abuse in those institutions.
Now, by institutions, are you talking about like they would take them to like children's homes, boarding school? Like we talked to a lot of people from like the troubled teen industry where they were, and we hate that term, troubled teen, right? Because it's really just traumatized teen or traumatized child.
These were more like holding centers or processing centers. I wasn't personally there, but from the accounts of these different teams, they were literally like, I mean, think of them in different countries, so whatever they call them there, but like institutions. In some cases, children did not survive those institutions.
Oh my gosh.
The extent that, yes, these very bad things continued happening. But, you know, when you talk about trauma-informed care and aftercare and all of that, an issue I'm very passionate about and very involved in today, which we can talk more about. But yeah, there's a misconception that just because you see children were rescued, that those children are necessarily safe. But to build out this story, unfortunately, I'm speeding it up, but after about 2 short years, there was an international court case that went all the way up to the UK, and Lord Justice Wallace acquitted the whole group.
No way. I didn't know that. That's awful.
You can see here, not one adult was convicted, prosecuted, not one adult. Not one adult.
Why do you think that is? Why though? Like why would they not one adult?
On an international level, unpack that level of corruption. Imagine how much it cost them to pay that off. But seriously, tell me to my face why our stories did not end there. That's a rhetorical question. But I'm unpacking this so people can unpack
digest it.
else. That's the level
Yeah.
the United States government failed tens of thousands of us children who should have had a childhood at that point. So realize that was in 89, this happened around 92, 93. Our story should have ended there. However, what it did do is it reduced the predator's ability to operate. So I speak a lot about the impact of awareness and how important it is also to take action and not just to be aware and end it there, because that, my friends, is not that helpful. However, what awareness does do, it reduces the predator's ability to operate. It makes it harder for bad guys to get away with doing bad things to children when we, the people, are not only willing to acknowledge that bad things are happening and not okay with any of us, but then hopefully compelled to do something about it. So in this instance, although they returned all the children and all the adults and nothing to see here, folks, everything was fine, it did literally force the cult to pretend to be less abusive. They literally burnt the books. There was a list of things to burn. They literally implemented like minimums and maximums for, you know, abusive things and punishments and all of that. They were literally forced to pretend to be less abusive. And that is the reason my upbringing was almost night and day different from that of my oldest sibling, and still something I would not wish on any child.
So is that when they like rebranded the name?
It had been rebranded by the time I was born. I don't know the year that they changed their name from the Children of God to the Family, but I want to say it was in the 80s. They have been suffering what they called, ready, religious persecution.
Oh,
it's because we love Jesus and they don't like Jesus, and that's why they're persecuting us for righteousness' sake. But yeah, that had started like, I don't know, long before I was born, because obviously they were doing sketchy things all over the world. And basically, this is a whole other dynamic of cults, but there's the cult within the cult, which is the nucleus leadership, which happened to be, this is not a flex, but my mother happened to be one of the top leaders. So like they had a very organized structure on like the local, state, country, continent level. And then there was the actual nucleus of leadership with like the prophet of God type cult guru guy. Yeah. So my mother decided to work herself up to those ranks. You know how they say she sold their soul for rock and roll? Like she did not sell her soul. She just climbed the ranks of cult power and is responsible for the abuse of tens of thousands of children. So that's what happened there. But that being said, this cult within the cult, right? So the nucleus, the leadership that basically tells people what to think and how to live their lives, or is that separation or middleman between God and the way that people should live, right? Creates a very powerful power dynamic. And they thrive on secrecy. We can talk about financial corruption, but finances, money is always the lifeblood of every organization, specifically religious organizations, specifically the ones that like to, let's call it, use power to control people. And ironically, the word of God tends to shift a little bit depending on how much money you give. You get a little more leeway. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Your forgiveness is free. Your grace is
have more liberties, because praise the Lord.
Right. Oh my gosh. They're like, yeah, we know your heart. You really didn't mean to do that really, really terrible, bad stuff to all those kids. Because we know you're a good man of God. And then, yeah, it gets so awful.
If it's hard for me to have dark humor about something, it's pretty off, right? But like the biggest problem here, again, is like a bunch of kooky adults doing kooky stuff. Like that's just not my problem. You know what I mean? One of the things that this group was notorious for is a practice they called, flirty fishing.
Flirty fishing.
Basically prostituting themselves to tell people about Jesus and get their donations. Anyway, grown-ups doing whatever the fuck they did.
What? Yes,
Flirting, FFing, like, religious prostitution. They didn't call it that, but that's absolutely what it was. It was like, okay, oh man.
Picture the men, like the women
are coming to mind, and I'm just trying to issue all that evil.
I have never heard of that in my life. That is crazy.
No, that's like a practice they will defend to the death. But anyway, I'm just saying, like, things like that and so much more, like not even, top 20 things that like the second and third generation, those of us are like worried about. Like that's a non-issue compared to the amount of abuse, the levels of abuse, the different ways all the children were abused, and that they called it God's love, God's highest will. There are so many people, including my parents, that would be like, that's the best way I could have raised you. Like in their heads, this was not, oh no, we're getting away with doing bad things to children. They were like, this is God's love. This is the way God wants it. This is how God designed. Like, oh, it was not something they were ashamed of at all. So again, to earn your rank in any form of leadership, you had to be the most evil and psychotic person, because that type of rank is earned.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
There was lots of group orgies, right? Or teaching the kids how to do really bad. I mean, teaching kids how to do group orgies stuff, right?
This cult is one of the most notorious for pedophilia and incest and trafficking of all the cults. They always rank normally like top 5, top 3, but definitely in the top 10 of anyone who's studied cults. So again, like I'm not even acknowledging, like I don't even care about what the adults were doing in terms of, yes, all of it was really fucking weird. But when I talk about, this is also not like a mommy issue. It's like, it's acknowledging, like my mother literally wrote the book on child abuse, like a literal handbook of how, with images and pictures and all these things. So my oldest sibling was unfortunately part of that experiment, if you will. And that was what was perpetuated or instructed to the rest of the group. So just, again, real quick, for the adults who decided to join, I get that, like, yay, peace and love. So let's unpack that characteristic, right? It's people who are searching community, who are vulnerable. Maybe they're trying to run away from or escape something in their life, be it the law or just like they don't like. Thoughts and prayers to everyone who's very vulnerable. Nothing wrong with that. That being said, when they find some like, yay, we're your family, peace, love, and Jesus, and free hugs and beautiful women, right? They find this place of belonging, and there's this, yay, we're your family now. There's this separation and isolation, right? We can unpack these control tactics, but I'm just getting to the point here. When they decide to buy in hook, line, and sinker, I can absolutely allow for some grace to be like, well, they were going through some weird stages in their life. Okay. Then they have children. And then they instruct these children, and then they allow people to perpetuate abuse. And then they allow these children to grow up thinking that's God's love. And then they instruct these children that this is like the best way of living. Like it's a whole other level of not a good person when you're perpetuating that abuse on a child who, again, knows nothing different. Like this is how I oversimplify it for people. It's like being born and raised under a rock, and you're told red is blue. And every single adult around you, every picture on the wall, every book you're allowed to read, every music, everything you're allowed to watch, because we had no outside influences. Mm-hmm. You're told red is blue, and that's your reality. So that's, children are sponges. There's nothing, they're going to grow up just like you can teach a child any language or culture to like any kind of food. Like that's how they grow up. That's their normal. Then at a certain age, if you have a mind like mine, you might start asking questions and be like, I feel like red could be red sometimes. And these people say that sometimes, what about in this case? And you're told you can't ask questions. And they're like, no, you have to take it by faith. And you're like, yeah, but what if? No, like you are not allowed to ask questions. That becomes very, ungodly, bad, whatever the bad things they say it is. Then there are levels of abuse that are basically punishment for those who ask questions or try to step out of line. Now, once again, I am focusing on the experience of the children. Thoughts and prayers to all the grown-ass adults who are exploited, but that is on a very different level than a child who cannot defend themselves, than a child who has no advocacy, than a child who has nowhere safe to go.
Yeah.
So another realm I'm very passionate about, like I was talking about the aftercare and recovery side of once a child is rescued, where are they safe? So here's a rhetorical question, right? We can talk later, but about the way I left wasn't some big like heroic story. I just found a way out, but I had just turned 20 years old. So some well-meaning people, not people who know what they're talking about, but well-meaning people will be like, oh, wow, you really stayed a long time. They'll say things like that. And I'm like, bless your heart. Let me ask you a rhetorical question, right? Let's take 5-year-old me, 8-year-old me in Brazil, or 10-year-old me in Mexico, or like whatever. Let's pretend like I was physically able to get past the adults and the security and like sneak out of this house and sneak past the guard dogs and and all these different things, and then jump over this big tall cement cinder block wall with the glass on the top and jump to the other side. Like let's pretend I could physically escape outside these compound walls in Brazil. I don't exist on paper and I'm an American child. Where would I have gone? Rhetorical question, unfortunately. where are the safe houses for survivors, the shelters, the protection? Like, where would I have gone? And by the way, my parents are the evil, right? So like hypothetically, that would not have been very safe return.
Yeah.
So you could take that same situation anywhere I was in the world. But even when I was in the United States for 4 years of my childhood, from the age of 10 to 14 years old, I was in Houston, Texas. So, okay, I'm in America. It's a little bit easier to, maybe we could pretend like maybe safer on the streets, not sure. But anyway, where would I have gone? And would they not have returned me to my parents? Well, unfortunately, that would not have been safer for anyone. Now, we can unpack more about that later, but there is a lot that people can do. And there are a lot of things that people don't understand. So in order to address this problem, we have to understand the real problems and the solutions. Not the things we would like to be the solutions, but the objective things that are helpful and are often not.
But you and I met on TikTok. So you do talk to the audience about how churches are really like, where are the churches in this? Like the churches, you're supposed to be like a haven of safety. It's supposed to be about protecting children and protecting the innocent. And it's like there was no resource for you, which makes me really sad because there should have been and there wasn't. And it's really like a failure of not only the system of like government that we have, but like even just like the system of the church is always looked at as a place of protection, a place where people can go to and flee to and find, a safe haven. But you have found just, in your experience and now in your training that you do, that churches are like almost non-existent to help or to even like learn or be trained on what to do and how to help these children. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So, granted, it is a generalization, meaning I'm sure there are a few churches. Unfortunately, no one's been able to name more than 3, but I would welcome, like, please let me know the ones that are. So before anyone hears this message, it's like, oh, you're just trying to, you've seen the reactions, right? Instead of sections, like, please prove me wrong. I'm not trying to be right about this. It's just that I've done extensive research. Like, let's not even talk about the 20 years of experience in my childhood where all the people who call themselves Christians were doing the bad things, right? Let's talk about today. And why don't we see churches on the front lines of protecting children? And what do I even mean by that? So in summary, okay, I escaped this cult when I was 20 years old. Now that's a whole other story, but zero support, your family's evil. There's no, safe place in society. So I hit the ground running. I did what I could and I did really good things being an entrepreneur and built different businesses and all these things. I'm just very, focused ahead and like did not give space to kind of sit around and be sad about it, I guess. That being said, fast forward about 10 years and it came to my attention how big of an issue child trafficking is today in the United States. So obviously I was aware of what I escaped and why, but I thought it was more of an isolated, like weirdo cult over there that I hope no one finds out about, this weird thing in my past type thing. When it came to my attention that the United States is the biggest problem, the biggest source and destination for human trafficking in the world, number one, then, okay, I'm a real research nerd. So first things first, I was horrified, as any of us should be, but I went and did some research like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? What's the data? Who's talking about this? Oh, shit, right? That's when I was like, bro, what? That's not okay. Then I was like, well, wait a minute, who's talking about this? Like no politicians, no public figures, celebrities. Okay, what, okay, so let me try to find some nonprofits that are doing some good work and support them. That's a whole other subject, but that's a very difficult one because unfortunately, there are a lot of nonprofits collecting millions of dollars in the name of combating trafficking, which is a very specific claim, that are to varying degrees of ineffectiveness, from just sort of posting things on social media to just exploiting the problem.
And sometimes also procuring children themselves in the guise of we're rescuing these children, but they're actually procuring them.
Absolutely. Different levels of part of the problem in a nutshell. Yeah. So, it's very heart-wrenching to say the least, and I'm very skeptical of nonprofits, and I encourage everyone to do thorough research before supporting, not because I don't want you to support, but because I want you to support the good ones, because the good ones are the ones that are generally not as loud and, fancy online and doing the good work, but not getting the government grants and the funding and all these well-meaning donations. So that being said, when I re-entered this space of combating child exploitation, there are a lot of organizations that have a religious undertone, which is fine. But me coming in as a survivor of trafficking, etc., and facing a lot of these Christians that, like, bless their hearts, they're well-meaning, but they're like, oh, you can't heal without Jesus, and you have to read the Bible, and just read the Bible and you'll be good. And I'm like, which language would you like me to sing the Bible to you in? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I'm just looking for people to take action. Like, that's fine. I'll smile and wave. It's not offensive to me. It wasn't like traumatizing, but I was like, okay, is your focus to help, or is your focus that it has to be done according to the way you think should be done? You want it to be pretty. You want it to be, yay, Jesus, now I'm healed. Like, that's not going to work for every survivor. So I really had to spoon feed these different, founders and groups and people like, hey, that would actually be really difficult. Like, if you rescue a child from a religious cult and expect them to wake up and sing about Jesus every day, that's probably very traumatizing. We probably shouldn't do that. We probably need a trauma-informed approach. So that's, and it's very difficult for them to comprehend. So all that to say, I did a lot of revisiting this concept of, religion behind trying to help protect children, and then also uncovering a lot of organizations that are simply operating under the guise of yay God and save the children, and very loud about that, but very lean on the action, like just not doing a lot of things to actually put their money where their mouth is, and again collecting millions of dollars in the name of combating this issue. And they're either simply misappropriating funds, which is a big issue because that should be going to the cause, and or they're really just anti-porn organizations calling themselves anti-trafficking organizations. That gets into a whole other thing because it's a really interesting investigation that I would love to unpack. But all that to say, like, let's first correct the premise of like, what are we combating? And then let's agree that while Jesus is great, let's not, approach this with bias, because that might not be the best approach for every situation. And then you'd get the Christians that just want to thoughts and prayers it away. And again, they're claiming to combat trafficking when they really just want to be spiritual warrior gurus. And that's also, so then I'm like, look, the Bible says faith without works is dead. So like, now I'm going back into these scriptures that I've memorized that I haven't revisited for like 15 years. And I'm like teaching Christians how to Christian. It's like this ironic position of like, bro, I'm not even trying to convince you. I'm just using your logic to help you understand this concept. It's like I'm pulling out these verses by memory and stuff. And first of all, this is ironic, I have yet to meet a Christian that knows the Bible better than me. And then,
yeah, that's very interesting. I will say, because do you consider yourself atheist now?
No, I'm a very
okay.
I'm very
okay. I wasn't sure.
Organized religion, but here's how I oversimplify it. Religion is a business. There's a middleman who collects a toll. Spirituality is your direct connection to a higher power, the divine, God, universe, whatever you want to call it. That's fine. I'm not like, oh, I could go so deep on this, but like, it's about like what we're called to do is, when the Bible is very strong about faith and action and protecting children. It's very strong about faith, belief, certainty, whatever words there. And it's very not specific at all about, ready, going to church on Sunday or tithing to the church and all these other things, or ready, one more, or accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Like, the Bible doesn't say any of those things. In fact, it says, howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands. The one time Jesus went to church as an adult, he flipped tables and kicked ass, and that was pretty cool. So like, it's just kind of ironic that these days, the majority of the church, the body of believers, right, are very focused on like these things the Bible does not talk about. You could even say are not biblical, but they're very not focused on or not willing to focus on the whole aspect of like what we're actually called to do. If you consider yourself a Christian or following of the teachings of Jesus Christ, there were some really specific instructions there that don't seem to be like priority in most churches today. But one thing Jesus went really hard on was protecting children. So here's the irony of that, right? There were 2 times in the Bible Jesus got pretty gangster. So the one time he went to church as an adult and kicked ass, and it was when he was talking to a group of people on a mountain and they did not let children through the crowd. He said, let the children come unto me. And he said, by the way, it would be better for you to put a millstone around your neck and to be drowned in the bottom of the sea than for you to offend one of these little ones. That same verse with very few variations is repeated 3 times in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I feel like Jesus meant it. That was also the one threat Jesus ever made. Every other time he was pretty peace and love, except the one time he cast the church leaders to hell. But the one time he was not peace and love, I've overthought this, as you can imagine. It's just that he went really hard to protecting children. He also used the word offended, which I find interesting because he didn't say violate or defile or something worse. He said, don't let me catch you offending one of these little ones. He used a gangster ass threat to be like, go peel your face off rather than offend a child. Okay. I feel like that was very important to Jesus. And there were lots of other verses in the Bible about how much he esteemed children. Okay. So all that to say, just for biblical context, right? Again, I'm forming my logic here on the logic of Christians or people who say they follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, few things to unpack. Most Christians, when they hear about, for example, my upbringing, like, I'm very sorry that happened to you. That's terrible. Oh, but those weren't real Christians. You know what's sad? My favorite one was, you know what hurts me the most?
Yeah.
Hurts them the most. You don't know my Jesus.
Right.
Oh no, they didn't say that. Do they say that?
Like wholeheartedly with tears in their eyes. Then I ended up comforting them. Anyway, here's the point though. So they're like, I'm sorry that happened, but those weren't the real Christians. I'm like, okay, cool story. I can accept that. So where are the
right?
Cool story.
Where are the people following the teachings of Jesus Christ? Where are the churches that are actually safe for children? The ones who are not afraid to have a zero tolerance policy for child abuse and trafficking? Where are the churches that are speaking up against this? By the way, every single time I've done public speaking, normally I like rock people into the truth of child trafficking is real. Here's what we can do about it. We need our communities to be very active about this. We need our communities to be safe places for children and to be intolerant of predators. So then churches are one of those things that are in every community that should be a safe place for children and that statistically are sort of a haven for predators, unfortunately, because that's like a very rampant thing that is often not reported, but also has a lot of really bad reports. And also the way that it's mishandled is very troublesome because in a lot of cases, these predators are not only not prosecuted, but the church keeps it very quiet. They might even suppress the issue or maybe just like move that deacon to a different church where he can start new. Often they like lay hands on him to forgive the predator while the victim, the child, is left completely helpless and often even made to feel like it's their fault. So very intolerant of that madness. Now let's circle back to what I've done to try to help. Ready? Because like, oh, it's so hard for me to smile and wave at this bullshit, but because I'm serious about like, it's not about getting people to agree with me. It's about literally how can we make our communities less susceptible to bad things happening to children. So I talked to various, again, I've worked with probably 100 different nonprofits in the last few years. A lot of them I no longer work with for specific reasons, but some of them were doing good things in different realms. That being said, a lot of them were like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, God bless you for what you do. I'm sure the churches are helping you. And you're like, yeah, no, here's what I tried to do though. I've created programs after hearing way too many stories. We're not even talking about myself and my peers and my childhood. We're talking about today, modern day American Christian churches, rampant with abuse and just for whatever reason, unwilling to support survivors at all. So I've implemented entirely free programs. One of them was called Activate the Church. This is all dark humor for me because I don't like being right about this. I just want to help, but like I want to be wrong about this. Okay. Now then, still dark humor because like my friends who know me, they're like, Kim, what are you doing? Like none of us think this is going to work. But the well-meaning people on the outside that are like, oh no, if you tell the churches, they'll be, I'm like, okay, let's try. So I put together and the Activate the Church program was literally like a checklist that I wanted people to be able to take to their church and be like, hey, how are we doing on this in protecting children? Very practical, cost-effective solutions for churches that I took a lot of time to build in consultation with different pastors and people who go to church. Because I was like, does this make sense? Is this practical? Is there any reason someone wouldn't do this? What are some of the nuances? Okay, this free program, literally from fire safety exit doors to making sure people are vetted and have background checks if they have access to children, like just very logical things. All right, we had a group of volunteers. They took them to the different churches that they frequented. I know for sure one volunteer who I know personally took it to 27 churches. How many churches do you think were willing to do these little checklisty things?
Oh, I know the answer to this because I saw your TikTok on it, so I'm not going to say.
No, I bet 0, huh?
One of those churches said yes. Did they? I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Then, but it gets better. Me speaking out against this, because by the way, every time I do a speaking event or social media live stream or whatever it is, I ask people, is your pastor, preacher, person, church leadership speaking out against this, like making sounds with their mouth is what I'm asking. Okay, got it. And I'm like, are they speaking out against this? I've never had more than 3 people in a room with hundreds of people and a live stream with thousands of people. I've never had more than 3 people. Generally, it's 2 that say, yes, my pastor is making sounds with their mouth, like Jesus told us to do. Okay, so that's disgusting to me. So this other, maybe a year later, there were these 2 pastors, and I got to give them a shout out because they are the only 2 pastors that I would give a shout out to. Anyway, in middle of nowhere, South Carolina, there were these 2 pastors that were very compelled by this message. And they were like, we're going to show you the church has your back. This is not what Jesus would do. Like, we're going to speak out to protect children, blah, blah, blah. We put together this pledge called Millstone Ministries. It was called it a commitment because we wanted to eliminate any word that could cause any kind of, excuse for people not to do things. So we worded it so well. And it literally, it had the verse, it would be better for you to put a millstone around your neck and be drowned in the bottom of the sea than for you to defend one of these little ones. It put the 3 different references. And then it asked 3 things on this commitment that we just wanted churches to sign. Like, now we're not even asking for sounds with the mouth. We're just asking for pen to the paper. I'm completely aware that means nothing. We're just making a point. So this pledge said 3 things. It said, number 1, we have a 0 tolerance policy for child abuse and trafficking. Number 2, we will thoroughly vet anyone in our congregation that has access to children, vet and monitor. Number 3, we will not, ready, knowingly support known child abusers or traffickers. See how intentional that wording is? Like, why would you not? Sign a piece of paper. By the way, we did a whole live stream at their church. We were like, we will, yay, like promote you, support you. Make sure to yay if you're going to sign this piece of paper because we want everyone to sign a piece. Okay. Those 2 pastors took that pledge, that commitment. One of them was part of some kind of Baptist network of pastors, and he took it to them. It was over, I think it was like 105 different pastors in his network that he was a part of as a pastor. Okay. How many of those churches do you think signed a piece of paper?
Oh, probably 0. I don't think none of them.
Okay, 2. I'm so impressed. I have to tell you, I have such low expectations for churches. I'm so amazed right now that even that many, like that's
those were 2 personal friends of his who were pastors, but still 2 of them signed a piece of paper and were willing to be acknowledged. Like, bro, we are not, anyway, just play as dumb as you possibly can. In what world would that be an issue for you, right? We're not asking for your devotion. We're just literally asking you to commit to protecting children. Okay, more I could say there. But, and in general, when I'm out here on the front lines, when I'm working with law enforcement, when I'm supporting these survivor centers and helping to set them up, when I'm working with trafficked children and victims and survivors, when I'm playing dumb and smiling and waving to the face of politicians, I promise you I don't see the church on the front lines. And I promise you I don't see churches that are willing to even speak up in defense of protecting children. Now, again, I would like to hope that there are some, and I would like to find them because I am genuinely wanting to find, ready? The churches who will follow the teachings of Jesus Christ when it comes to children. However, the excuses I've gotten, the deflection is incredible. The excuses are, the church is calling out the church. So I did this little experiment recently on TikTok, just because, like, again, I'm hard to impress, but I would like to be aware of if there are any churches that are actually protecting children and be willing to be outspoken about it. So in calling this out, it's incredible to me that I've gotten just so many. I understand not every, Christian on TikTok represents every Christian. Yes. Okay. The Christians on TikTok, they were just like so deflective. And so, yeah, but you're making us feel bad. Yeah, but I'm busy. Yeah, but what are you doing? Yeah, but like, just, there was probably like in total of like comments. Okay. Maybe 5, definitely less than 10, like Christians that were like, the church needs to be on the front line. Like, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to agree with Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, by the way,
right.
Yeah. There was probably less than 10, and Jenny was one of them that was like, absolutely, the church should have no reason not to, be on the front lines about this. Why would churches be afraid to speak up? But then even more concerning, there were so many Christians that were unwilling to even acknowledge this as an issue, like acting as if I was literally making this up. Like, it's not a problem. Ready? They're like, no statistics support that. I'm like, I'm sorry, who's researching this? Who would fund this research? And if I did present statistics, would that change your mind?
Would they actually do something if you gave them statistics? Would they actually do something about it? Probably not.
How many victims do you hear from? Because do a little YouTube search. There's lots and lots of stories. talking about that. I'm not even talking about my lived experience with people who call themselves Christians. Cool. I'm talking about today. I've yet to see churches that are truly like willing to speak up against it. Point one. When I'm asked why, I don't really get the answer, but the conclusion is literally like, we don't want to offend people in our congregation. Bro, tell that to Jesus's face, right? Point one. The church should be a safe place for children and families, and definitely not a safe haven for predators. And point three, if any community, now, well, let me be clear. I never am going to remove the responsibility of our elected officials whose job it is to protect and serve from the actual, like when we talk about the corruption and who's supporting this, why don't we have a federal agency that's even pretending to focus on combating human trafficking? Lots more I could say, but like our federal government is a whole other realm of responsibility.
Yeah.
And since they vote, that means it's up to we the people. Okay. With that reality, I feel like the church should be on the front lines of protecting children. I feel like that's what Jesus said would want to see being done. I feel like that's the most important thing they should be speaking about. So when they're like, yeah, but we're busy doing other things, I'm like, I think Jesus would still flip tables if he was alive today in church.
So, okay, for anyone that's listening who is like, well, I'm a churchgoer and I work with kids in the youth group, or I work in the Sunday school department with kids, and our church does vet everybody that works with kids. We have background checks. We got, name tags, and there's check-ins and all this stuff. But there's a specific church I'm thinking about, actually two in my area, that within the last couple months, stuff has come up in the news where the youth pastor or a Sunday school worker was caught doing inappropriate things with a minor. Okay, so, but these same churches are saying, well, we have all these things in place. We're doing all the things that you're mentioning. We're doing the background checks. We're vetting these people. What can they do? Because I know for a fact, and part of the problem is the church, because if something happens within the church, it's not reported to law enforcement 9 times out of 10, because they want to brush it under the rug. They don't want a scandal. They don't want to draw attention. They don't want to hurt the cause of Christ, right? That's what they say. It's hurting the cause of Christ if we bring this out to the public. So let's just deal with it internally and then move on from it, right? So a lot of these people, these predators, aren't even on a background check, which then creates another problem. So like, what is the solution to that?
I've had this conversation with a lot of different Christians. Like I'm talking about off camera when I'm really just trying to get solutions. There's a lot of patterns there from the feedback I've gotten, or the responses rather. They're not used to someone calling them out in a way where I'm not saying God isn't real. I'm not saying, I'm not attacking their faith. I'm coming from wanting Christians to Christian better, right? And it's very difficult because it's like out of the realm of the box they've been very comfortable in. But if you're going to really implement, let's zoom all the way out, right? What is a Christian these days? If anyone that says I'm a Christian, okay, so that's an umbrella term that's essentially representing a lot of people doing a lot of different things. But me personally, I don't feel called to go do Christian outreach to get the churches to Christian better, right? I'm very much called to the realm of protecting children. I'm wired for it in the way of like, I deal with darkness on a daily basis and I laugh in its face. Also because we are not meant to fear it. Also because most people are standing in the corner being afraid of the dark. Now, I would like to find the Christians that are willing to show up like, if God be for us, who can be against us? You know how many grown-ass adults look me in the face and they're like, I can't believe you do this. This must be so scary. What if they come after you? Oh no, I can't believe you re-traumatize yourself every day. And I'm like, bro, are you really suggesting that we can use fear as a viable excuse to keep us from protecting children, or that we're too scared to think about the things children are experiencing on a daily basis? Well, here's the thing. If God be for us, who can be against us? If you truly believe that greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, act accordingly. I'm literally trying to find the people, but like in this conversation, the Christians that are willing to utilize that power and stop hiding behind their fear. Because guess what? Children get to be afraid of the dark. We don't get to. We get to turn on the lights. Not a lot of Christians are used to that power. when I come at Christians with that kind of call to action, man, they get defensive. And again, like realize not only the logic I'm basing my logic on is their logic from the Bible anyway, but they're not used to that type of compelling power. Now, like pick one or two, right? God is all powerful and we can do, okay, why are you using fear as an excuse? What are you afraid of, right? The big bad government, the big bad guys. There's a lot of things I could unpack about how weak and pathetic the vibration of fear is, but also why evil is thriving. I've seen too many people be too cowardly to do anything about it. So again, when I'm looking for demographics in our society, like who can actually help with this? 100% of the time, I'm generalizing, but generally service members for free and for fun. It's actually very healing, a lot of redemption in that for them. Bikers, for whatever reason, just every single time. I don't see the churches there. And I don't see the church as having an excuse because they definitely have the manpower. They definitely have the resources. And for God's sake, they should have the power. But I don't see them utilizing it. So in the what can we do conversation, number one, if we are unwilling to acknowledge a problem, how do we expect to solve it?
Yeah.
To your point, a lot of people are too uncomfortable to face the truth. Now, again, I don't think Jesus would be okay with that if he was here today. So point one, what are we protecting? Generally, it comes down to power and profits. If a church is uncomfortable discussing this issue, it's probably because they're aware either of their own guilt or of someone in their congregation who may be offended by that message and whose donation they don't want to lose. So point one, what are we protecting? Because if we're biased to our team instead of the truth, instead of Jesus, instead of what's right, we're just picking sides now. We're not trying to solve problems. So who's actually willing to acknowledge the truth, the real problems? Let's start there, right? And if not, why? Let's dig into that. Let's get some answers. So that's why I've tried to create these oversimplified resources as a sort of checklist style way to see, are we even willing to talk about this? If not, why? What was more important to Jesus than protecting children? What was something he went harder about than protecting children? Now, I love to have this conversation, especially with pastors and church leadership, because I can quote the Bible to you all day long to defend my stance. Name one verse that actually does not agree with me. I'll wait. So point one, let's acknowledge that there's a problem. Let's use our God-given logic to actually define there is a problem. And definitely there are various solutions for these problems. So step one, awareness, right? Step two is action. What are the actions a church can take? All right, number one, if your church is afraid to talk about it, that's a problem. Please stop tithing to them. Please make sure your children are not alone with them. Seriously. Also, then find a church who is willing to talk about it. Again, we're only asking for sounds with our mouth at this point still. That's it. Okay. Willing to talk about it. Step one, speak out against it, pray against it, like, I don't know, follow some of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Then what are they doing about it? Like, realize a lot of the deflections I get, they're like, well, my church does background check people. Okay, cool. Realize baseline is safe. Baseline, right. Well, that's not, we're doing something. That's like baseline, we're not bad. Baseline, we don't have child predators running rampant in our church. Okay, good. You actually like baseline, make sure adults are safe for children. That's baseline. Do you guys disagree?
Exactly. That is baseline. That's bare minimum.
Yes, that's bare minimum. Absolutely. Okay. So bare minimum is let's make sure our church, our physical temple made of hands, is safe, that we have the safety measures in place, that for God's sake, we background check our people who have access to children, but also, are we monitoring them? Are we training them? Do we have a check-in policy? Do we have accountability? Here's the other step that I would like to see churches very outspoken about, and I think Jesus would agree with me. If you want to create a culture in your church that is intolerant to predators, create a culture in your church that is intolerant to predators. So in the same way that we can acknowledge this as a problem, let's also speak out against it. Let's make sure people in our congregation know that that Jesus had a zero tolerance policy to people who offended children, and I'm with him on that one. So like, I'm not even asking for millstone in the bottom of the sea, but I'm saying let's not be too afraid to make some sounds with our mouth and speak against it. Make sure people know that is not acceptable. That's an excommunicable offense. You will be shamed. Like, whatever it is that you need people to know, they will be a complete outcast, and for sure we will enforce the law. Like, number one, you are not a Christian. As Christians, I want to see Christians denouncing the bad actors, those who aren't real Christians. Because again, when I'm like, where are the real Christians? And they're like, oh, generally, you know what I mean? There's the minority, and they're generally not the ones that are like loud and pretty about, I'm a Christian all over the internet. You know, it's the ones that are actually doing the work and walking the walk. But that being said, in a church, we should be very aggressively outspoken about our zero tolerance policy for anyone who would offend a child, abuse a child, traffic a child, etc. Like, we should not be okay with that. Then there's, what do we do if something bad happens? How would we handle that? That's a whole protocol that needs to be written. But look, let's try to make it impossible for accidents to happen. But beyond that, how would we handle it? And are we willing to actually do what Jesus instructed us to do? Again, I'm not even asking for millstone in this modern day and age. I'm asking us to enforce the law. So what I'm saying is, any church that keeps it a secret, any church that thinks they can brush it under the rug, any church who thinks they can lay hands on the perpetrator and ask God to forgive the perpetrator, is not following the teachings of Jesus Christ. Realize Jesus did not ask for dialogue or forgiveness if someone offends a child. And he used the word offend a child, not even a worse word. He said millstone, like, full stop, no discussion. No forgiveness. The other thing I go pretty hard on is, because a lot of well-meaning Christians, religious people will be like, well, you know, don't judge. Jesus, you know, the Bible says not to judge. You're just judging. And I'm like, actually, the Bible says to judge wisely. Also, I leave the judgment up to God. You know what I mean? Like, when Jesus said millstone, I'm with him. I'm just saying, in this modern day and age, the least we can do is involve the authorities and make sure the law is enforced, specifically when it comes to child offenders. Okay, so brushing it under a rug, I think Jesus would spit those people out.
Yeah. And also, I think it's interesting to note too, it's like, okay, these churches are getting background checks and they're vetting the people that are working with children. What about Bob, the deacon, who doesn't work with children? What about Sam, the choir director, who does things in the choir loft with the teen? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't be too careful. And so, do you think churches should just be running background checks on everyone that enters the door? I mean, like, I know you can't be too careful, but at the same time, like, how do you vet everybody that walks through the door? Because that would be almost impossible to do that. But then you also have churches who are like, oh, well, yeah, we know about Bob, what he did years ago, and we've forgiven him. He's confessed it. He's, you know, whatever. And so we have to just forgive him and allow him to just be in the congregation still. I mean, there's obviously, that's more than one thing that I brought up, but it's like, these are the things that I've heard, and I know Susie has heard over the years, where there's just excuse after excuse for allowing this stuff to continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on that spectrum of intensity, where it's like covering it up makes you guilty, change my mind.
Right.
Exactly. Then what, on a practical level, let's take a well-meaning church who is completely, like, truly committed to protecting children and truly not aware if there are bad things happening in the church, but like, how can they be proactive and actually helpful in this? So I'll say this, a lot of background checks are not sufficient. Look, this is a complicated problem. I'm not here to pretend like it's an easy, quick fix type solution. It's not a one size fits all problem. There's not a one size fits all solution to any layer of the problem of child exploitation and trafficking. I'm here to be real about that. However, there are a lot of solvable problems and helping one child matters. So I'm here to, you know, remove every possible excuse, but also make the truth as digestible and practical as possible, because I'm also a realist. So a lot of background checks are not comprehensive enough. Also, right. A lot of people who have experienced bad things have not been able to report it, or basically the perpetrators don't always end up on said sex offender lists or background check results. So beyond a background check, which I think should be baseline for anyone who has access to children. So I word it that way, because not only the deacon or the youth, whoever, like anyone who has access to children. Ideally, everyone who works at or like is associated with your church, right? At least have a background check, at least. But beyond that, what is the monitoring process? Number one, like, could you have security cameras everywhere? A lot of churches have a policy where they don't allow people to be alone with a child. I think that's a great idea. I think, you know, the buddy accountability system, but also the camera system is important. Now, again, it takes a leadership that is not corrupt to make sure that these things are actually being done and implemented and held accountable, but that's another layer. So the accountability is a big part of it. The speaking out against it is a big part of it. In short, evil thrives when good people do nothing. So if the church, and let's specifically call out the adults in general, but the men, the protectors in that church, if the protectors in that church are unwilling to talk about it and unwilling to, let's even use the word threats, because Jesus did that, right? If they are unwilling to even have the same millstone energy that Jesus had, I don't see them as a detriment to these predators. Let me tell you another secret about predators. 100% of the time, someone who would abuse a child is a weak, pathetic coward. 100% of the time. You will not find a strong man or woman abusing a child. So I don't say that to be tough. I say that to help us understand the characteristics of these predators. They seek out vulnerabilities. There's a lot of research out there that say, first of all, over 96% of convicted predators in this specific study is the Abel Harlem, forgot the rest of the name about the study. Over 96% of these abusers considered themselves religious. That is not surprising to us. That is very surprising to most religious people.
Wow, 96%.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, again, considered themselves religious, but they're not real Christians. Cool. Okay. Just because they're sitting next to you in the same building, singing the same songs you sing, does not mean they are safe for children, right? So the whole like, oh, he's a good person, he's a Christian. I need people to understand a lot of predators hide under the guise of good things or yay God or whatever. I'm not saying all Christians are. I'm saying predators are strategic and they will seek out these vulnerabilities. So while no church has to apologize for being welcoming and assuming the best in people, I need churches to understand not everyone coming through those doors has good intentions, specifically not for children. So you see the pattern here. Like, while we want to be accepting and yay God everybody, we also need to aggressively protect our children. So that makes it, a barrier between who has access to children, who's monitoring them, and what type of accountabilities and safeguards do we have, and how outspoken are we to make sure they know that it is a zero tolerance policy for us and that we are not going to overlook it. No amount of donations or tithe will change our mind on that. Which church is willing to do that?
Kim, okay, so I have a couple of things I want to say. All right, I love your enthusiasm about this. I have to tell you, I know exactly what you mean about that environment, that very controlled environment when you were a kid. And I hate that you have to justify and stand up for the way you were as a child. Where people are like, well, why didn't you get out? Why didn't you do this? I've had the same comments and stuff for why I stayed so long in this situation with my parents. Same thing, but I hate that you have to share that over and over with so many different people. And hopefully, eventually, it will educate and bring awareness that the kids do not have a say in that stuff. I mean, they really don't. And I had a police officer one time tell me, well, any kid that sees a crime or is being mistreated will always go to the police. And I was like, you are an idiot. That's what I was thinking. The police officer, I'm like,
that's why I do law enforcement training.
Yes. And I am so glad that you're willing to do that, because they are very trauma uninformed when it comes to children and the way that families especially control their kids. I call it carefully controlled blindness, the environment that a person manipulates and controls to get someone to turn a blind eye to the really bad behavior that's happening. And even carefully constructed blindness for that. And what I'm doing with my cat, I'm petting my cat. I get stressed out. She comes over and my little cat here, she said so anyways, what can we do to help support you other than just providing this as a chance for a platform to share this amazing information? Do you ever get discouraged? I'm sure you do. I know I do. You walk into a situation, you're like, this is going to change their minds. You have such powerful information. You're like, this is going to do it. These people are going to be blown away with what I've got to share them. And then their reaction is mediocre. I know, to me, I get deflated. I mean, so what can we do to help you with and encourage you?
Thank you. Well, I'm very fortunate that how do I say this? But I'm wired for this in the sense of being rather detached from people's opinions because I
Oh,
stand
it's beautiful. Yes.
I truly like, I'm honestly, this is not necessarily a flex, but for the sake of this context, right? Like I am the happiest, healthiest person I know, for real. Like it's not a front or a facade of for me, not even, you know, the passion, the authenticity, but what I mean is like the facing this darkness, I thrive on that shit. So taking down bad guys who hurt children, like that is a passion of mine. Realize there's no money in protecting kids. Realize all of this is stuff that I fund. I started a nonprofit that I fund. I work with law enforcement. I train, like all these things are things that I do because I must, because I've seen too much darkness and too many cowards who are unwilling to do anything about it. Now I've narrowed down my focus in a few ways, and I'll explain on the combating this issue. I no longer expect the church or the well-meaning people who say save the children to do anything helpful. I am now very embedded in working with law enforcement, government contractors, various branches of the military, different realms of all of that blurry face guy stuff, that those protectors who are well equipped to do something about this, who need the training. And again, when addressing this problem, it's the real problems and solutions of at the leadership level, there isn't training and resources, generally speaking, for the heroes on the front lines who want to do their job and who are essentially blocked from being able to do that right thing while they're on the clock. So real quick shout out, I also work with the Ranch, Texas. It's a law enforcement and government contracting training facility here in South Texas. We're about 1 hour south of San Antonio. We do a lot of really cool things here. We're doing a lot more. And it's very exciting to be a part of, but it's very fulfilling to see the right people come together and some of these legends and heroes that the public will never even know about that are doing some amazing things. So I can talk about that more, but like that shit lights me up, right? Then public facing, making it pretty for the public side of things. I've gotten away from the awareness and focus on child trafficking because it's too dark, scary, gross, and overwhelming for most people. There's a lot of people who still want to call it a theory, and that's cute when they try to say that to my face. It's very embarrassing, actually. But beyond, there's a lot of people who are unwilling to be aware. Full stop. And then there's people that are willing to be aware, the well-meaning, well-intentioned people that truly, like, you know, the busy mom that's like, oh my God, this is terrible, this is not okay, but what can I do about it, right? So it gets lost on them because the average person is not going to confront actual trafficking. Or there's people like spinning off in the directions of like other realms that is not part of this conversation and calling that sex trafficking, and that's not helpful either. So in the public facing realm, my focus is on digital safety or stopping child exploitation in the online world. Because number one, I'm very fucking passionate about it because I've done a lot of undercover work with law enforcement and I cannot unsee some of the things that I've seen while pretending to be a child on the internet, like what children are experiencing. Look, all of us here were, you know, raised without the internet. There's a whole different dynamic now in the access that predators have to children and how aggressive and like abundant these predators are on every single social media app I've ever been on with a baby child's looking profile picture and a name. Like I can go hard on that, but like I can, number one, real issue, big problem. Number two, it's a very solvable problem. In the digital realm, there is a lot that we, the people, can do to make a measurable impact. And I can unpack that. But the short version is all these problems are quite intentional and they are thriving because people are not aware of how solvable these problems are. So I'm working with tech giants and cybersecurity experts in the different realms of people that are willing to come together to solve problems, even if it's because it's a business model that they're trying to protect. The point is that I'm working with the ones who are willing to solve the problems. And the biggest problems are not the platforms that most well-meaning religious advocates are pointing at, ironically. No. The biggest problems are actually the biggest seemingly family-friendly platforms that everyone's totally fine with and that are rampant with child sex abuse material. That are
you're talking about like social media or are you talking, because most people are thinking, oh, pornography sites, right? Probably, but or like Tinder or whatever dating sites, but are you talking about specifically like more social media, like children being on social media sites? And
yeah, we can go hard on this. It's a very long answer to your question of what can we do to help. The short answer is check your child's device every single day. Use parental monitoring software. It's abundantly available. I'm not affiliated. I just promote them because I need them to at least do that. My website, digitaldefendersunited.org, has tons of free resources and basically checklists for online safety. So what people can do is protect their children, especially if they have access to the internet. Please don't give them unlimited, unsupervised access. And here's why. So let's get into this. It's, again, something I'm very passionate about and a lot of changes we're working towards. So in the realm of advocacy, again, we're not even talking about like the people that are actually exploiting children under the guise of protecting children. I'm talking about most of the advocates that, again, have a religious undertone, which is fine, but they're calling pornography the issue. They're saying pornography is sex trafficking, point one, and two, that it fuels sex trafficking, etc. But point two, they're also saying that porn sites are crime scenes rampant with child sex abuse material and exploitation. So obviously I had to look into those claims. Let me be real clear. Porn is not my thing, not interested, not protecting it, not advocating for it. I don't think it's necessarily healthy for even grown adults. However, I've done extensive research. So here's how this goes. This is me approaching a problem without bias, willing to address the real problems and implement real solutions. Okay. So the biggest porn site is called Pornhub. Now, most of these nonprofits and advocacy people that are saying they combat sex trafficking are calling out Pornhub, saying, shut it down, it's illegal, and all these things. So obviously I looked into it. Now, here's what happened. Previously, under the previous owner, which was some like overseas sketchy situation, there was definitely a lot of exploitation. Okay. Then it is now under new management as of March 2023. I'm speeding up the story because I can unpack this for hours and I have a lot of information I've posted about this. But March 2023, a new company bought it. Before the acquisition, they removed any content that did not have a consent form. So number one accusation, not the number one accusation, but like a huge accusation is that it's rape and women don't want to do it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, again, I'm not here to defend porn. I don't think I'm just saying, like, let's objectively look at this issue. Every piece of content, every model in every piece of content requires a consent form. That already was implemented before March 2023. Then the company that owns Pornhub is called ALO. It used to be called MindGeek. Again, new ownership, March 2023. The company that owns ALO is called Ethical Capital Partners. I've done a lot of interviews with those owners and those people. I've brought in third-party law enforcement, cybersecurity experts, all these different people to vet and try to break this technology that I'm about to tell you about. It's amazing. Here's the point. They invented proprietary technology to identify and eradicate child sex abuse material. It's called CSAM. Let's call it a business model. Let's call it protecting their business model, because I'm not even here to argue ethics and morals and pornography and, let's call it protecting their business model. I say that because nonprofits are like, you can't work with them, they're Satan. I'm not working with them, I'm not sponsored by them. Also, they have eradicated child sex abuse material, unlike any other platform. Okay, this proprietary technology is so effective, and I could unpack the layers of it. I've done that on different podcasts. Also, they have made it available for free to law enforcement.
Oh, wow.
Partnered with Crime Stoppers International, a lot of other agencies. The point is that the way, long story short, combining the databases, combining the technology, and streamlining the way that we not only identify, but then transfer and do something about, enforce the law against these bad things, it has completely brought things up to date for a process that was very archaic. So that's huge. All right, let's get to the point. NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is seen as the data authority on all things child exploitation. They publish an annual report of the biggest offenders, as well as the people, like the time frame, the response time, all the different tech platforms where they've identified child exploitation. Real quick pin before I continue that story. One of the biggest issues here that I see with these groups calling themselves anti-trafficking, and they're saying porn is bad. Here's their logic. Ready? Porn is bad. Okay. Make it illegal and it will go away.
Mm.
No,
yeah, that's like prohibition. That's so dumb.
No, stop. Ready? No. Okay. But also, here's the other part of that. If we're grouping together adult sexual entertainment with child exploitation, now you've lost the majority of the population. If we were to draw a line in the cement and say, if you're not hurting humans or animals, if you're doing adult stuff, like that's not my problem, you're constitutionally protected right, whatever. If we were to separate that from child exploitation, now we can have a conversation. This is illegal. Nobody should be okay with this. I don't think anyone would, have the balls to defend that. The point is that now we can solve a problem instead of have a discussion about morals and all these other like layers that don't need to be there. Okay. That being said, NCMEC publishes these annual reports of child exploitation identified on every tech platform. There's these lists of things. All of this is publicly available. I've wrote summaries on my website, but you can go look at the actual documents, etc., that are linked to. Okay. Yes. Who was the biggest offender of identified, reported, verified by NCMEC, child sex abuse material in their 2023 report? Who was the biggest offender?
It's probably church related.
Well, these are tech. These are only tech.
Oh, okay.
Oh, probably TikTok. Was it TikTok?
Facebook.
Facebook.
Because parents are putting their pictures out there of their kids, huh?
Oh,
Into that. Facebook had 17.8 million identified child sex abuse material, followed by Instagram with 11 point something million, followed by Google, followed by WhatsApp.
yeah, WhatsApp.
Top results are Meta. Okay. Followed by Twitter, followed by TikTok, and then Snapchat. So
yeah, I was going to ask about Snapchat because it disappears.
Right. So these are the platforms that have where sex abuse material has been identified, reported, verified. Okay. Now then, they also included Alo, the company that owns Pornhub and several other of the big porn sites. I don't even remember their names. Alo's platforms had 0 child sex material. 0. Okay. In addition to NCMEC's report, the DOJ did a 30-month investigation into all the back end, every full access into all Alo's platform, found 0 illegal content. There was one video where the consent forms had been forged by the studio, not the company Pornhub, by the studio that sent forged consent forms for adults. These were not children. Point is that was the one issue they found. It was not illegal content. It was simply non-consensual. That was the one issue they found. Now then, going back to all these advocacy groups that are screaming as if Pornhub is infested with child sex abuse material and exploitation and rape and trafficking and all these different things, not only are you removing people from focusing on the real problems, because where's that energy when it comes to the real offenders?
Right.
But I call it exploiting the problem, because you're not actually interested in solving the problem. If you're making money off the problem, if you're misleading people from the problem, if you're sponsored by their biggest competitors. I said what I said. Bro, this issue is insane when you get into the intentional corruption, the unwillingness to solve problems. And by the way, when I'm constantly in communication with the owners of Ethical Capital Partners, which own Alo, which own Pornhub and all the other ones, and when I'm outreaching to, as a survivor of trafficking who's dedicated her life to combat trafficking, when I'm reaching out to these very loud and outspoken advocates that are like, blah, 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 making all these very intense accusations. And I'm like, hi, would you like to come to the table for solutions-oriented conversation with the owner? Because all this research you've done, you know more than me. Come in and I'll mediate, I'll like, whatever. I'll be the middleman if you need, but like, let's solve problems. Why are they so unwilling? Point 2, when I asked for their source of information on these very specific claims, why did they block me?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm just making a point here. Like, I thought, silly me, I thought you might be interested in coming to the solutions-oriented conversation, but now I'm quite clear that you have no intention of solving these problems. And upon further investigation, you're quite willing to exploit the problem because the millions of dollars that they've raised have not actually gone to help any survivors. Or in one case, a group that raised 5 million helped, ready? 2 survivors whose images had been exploited. I'm not even talking about trafficking survivors. I'm talking about 2 adults whose images were non-consensually used. Okay, that's not okay. But then you're claiming that you're combating trafficking. You're taking money from well-meaning people that are wanting to contribute to the problem. Wanting to contribute to help solve this problem.
Yeah.
You're acting as if you are doing something helpful, and you're capitalizing on people's emotions by saying children are being harmed on Pornhub, let's take it down, as if that logic checks out. And by the way, why would you not want to work with, I'm talking about as a society, like let's talk about lawmakers, right? Let's make it illegal and force it into the dark web where it's not safer for anyone.
Right.
Says that has no idea what they're saying. Like, not just for context, not one person in any realm of local, federal, or state law enforcement, not one person in law enforcement has ever been like, oh no, yeah, you know, porn is bad, let's you. Not one person, they've been like, what? No way, right? They immediately get it, or they already know. A lot of advocacy groups are like, porn is bad. Okay, what's the solution? Let's start here. Like, I've really had to smile and wave and be like, look, the first domino that needs to fall is this one. If you're anti-porn, but you're not speaking out against CSAM, child sex abuse material, I don't call it child pornography because there's nothing pornographic about a child. Now, again, I'm not protecting adult content. I'm saying it's like, let's solve that problem once this problem is solved, because this one's already illegal. We don't need more laws and pictures being taken and papers being signed. We just need to enforce the law against this very specific issue.
Yeah.
How my squirrely ass brain works. Because like I said, there's no money in protecting children. And as we know, if Pornhub has done it, what the fuck is Google's excuse? By the way, did you know that the largest online collection of pornography on the internet is Google Images?
Oh, wow.
You can search for and find things on Google Images that you are not even allowed to search for on Pornhub. So these advocates that know better, capitalizing on people's emotions, like, bro, when I've been undercover pretending to be a child on the internet and grown-ass predators send who they think is a child pornography, and worse, never once have they sent me a link to Pornhub. They've sent me screenshots, images, videos, and all these other different disgusting things. Never once is it a link to Pornhub. So just realize, like, the logic does not check out about make it illegal and it'll go away. No. The dark web, the dark alleys are not safer for anybody, specifically not children. Point one. Point two, if you're serious about solving problems, why would you not want to work with the large companies who need to be compliant in order to stay in business, who are willing to work with people who will help them stay compliant and stay in business? Why would you not want to work with them? Oh, but they're Satan. I've literally been told, oh, you can't work with them. They're Satan.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just mind-blowing to me to think that Facebook is the number one. That blows my mind, because you think of Facebook, you think like, oh, I go on there and my aunt's pictures with her grandkids, or what, you know what I'm saying? You go on there, it's like family oriented, and you don't think about that aspect of it, which is obviously very real. So, Kim, take us to a little bit of, tell us as we end this. We do like to end with like hope and a positive note. And this is like, this subject matter is obviously not a very positive subject matter, but that is just the reality of this world and the world that we live in. And unfortunately, that is what it is. But we do want to give people, like, we have talked about, like, what can parents do? What can people do in the church? What can we do in society, in our communities? What do you do now as far as like what you are, talk a little bit more about, like where people can find you, where they can find like your advocacy group, how can they get involved, and sort of just like wrap it up in a nice, like hopeful bow for everyone and say, this is how you can get involved, and this is how you can reach me if you want to have me come talk to your group or whatever.
I love it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there is a lot of hope, and it's not only to try to be positive, but I do want people to know that there are some real heroes doing some amazing things in this realm. So if little old me can be out here with this little light of mine eradicating darkness, I want people to know that there's no excuse not to join this fray, and that it's actually very rewarding in the sense of, let's call it purpose and passion, but also in the sense of being able to see what's truly happening. So the truth will piss you off, but it'll also set you free, in the sense of, if we understand more about how this world works, the more problems we can solve. One of those things that I'm doing is making it a profit-driven reason to protect children. We could talk more about that, but in the tech world, right? In the law enforcement world. So like I said, I work with the Ranch, Texas. It's ranchtx.org. We actually do open enrollment training classes for civilians as well. So if you want to come train, you actually can.
Ooh, cool.
It's a really cool place. It's tactical paradise, and it's 300 acres of the most badass facility you've ever seen. Also, we're doing some really cool things on the law enforcement and agencies training side of things, which is incredible because that's so needed. And a lot we're doing on the medical side as well. I'm working with some people that it's a whole group behind this actually, but we're setting up a medical triage, which is basically an urgent care facility for the children who are rescued. That's a whole
Oh my God, I love it.
immediate medical care is a very difficult thing to talk about and a problem that needs to be solved very securely. So I want to give a specific shout out to the U.S. Marshal Service here in South Texas, because they're doing some amazing things, and many kids have been rescued in the last.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And traffickers have been prosecuted. And
Good.
next time I go smile and wave to whichever DA is trying to get reelected or look good in the public eye or whatever, and I'm like, hey, make some sounds with your mouth so that people think you're cool, so that, yay, say that we can get prosecutions. Like, I'll smile and wave to these politicians, and they can't say no to my face, not only because I don't work for the federal government, they work for me, but because I don't take no for an answer. Call this a theory to my face. So I just want to encourage people that if you want to see your community more involved, get more involved, and don't be silent about it. Don't be afraid of repercussions. I think, again, evil thrives when good people do nothing. I think the best thing we can do is use our voices and speak up. Make sure our elected officials, whether on a community level, local, state, etc., get involved. Let them know you're watching them, you're vetting them, and that you will vote accordingly, or whatever their incentive is. Like, play their game, but don't take no for an answer. So the other thing is, in the digital realm, again, lots of solutions, lots of really cool things happening in the digital realm. We are going to bully the big platforms into implementing at least the safeguards that Pornhub has implemented. And I'm going to use all those because I think it's funny to call them out, right? If they wanted to, they already would have, but these solutions exist. It's up to us to hold these people accountable. And again, not let our ignorance be bliss. Let's not look the other way. Take no for an answer. Let's not pretend like it's too big, dark, and scary or overwhelming. Let's do what we can. So at the very, very least, what people can absolutely do, even if you don't have kids like me, you can pick 5 children in your life to protect. I don't really go by statistics because most of these things are not reported, and the data is pretty disgusting when it comes to child exploitation. But that being said, if it's 1 in 5 children, all of us can pick 5 children and promise it won't be them. We can absolutely take those children under our wing. We can protect them in the digital realm. We can implement safeguards and boundaries and guidelines. We can communicate with them. We can listen. We can ask them questions. We can make sure that open line of communication is there, so that when, not if, they encounter the stranger danger on the internet, sliding into their DM, saying all the things that predators say, they need to be aware of those tactics, and they need to know that they can come to you and that you will listen. Full stop. That you will listen, not get them in trouble, but that you're there to help. So the better we can prepare our children for the reality that they're going to face in the world, and the more willing we are to do our part as adults to protect the innocent, we can absolutely change this dynamic. I promise you.
Thank you for coming on today and being here with us. We really appreciate it, Kim. Like, I'm just so proud of you and the work you're doing. Like, I think it's so necessary. Like, just from someone who grew up in a really bad environment as a child too. I love that you're doing this, and I just think you're amazing. So can't wait to talk further, like to even have you on again and maybe to talk in more detail about stuff that
there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, it's really cool. So
yeah, but in the realm of protecting children in the digital realm, my website is digitaldefendersunited.org. Tons of free resources that I'm begging people to implement, a checklist style thing. I've tried to make it as easy as possible. If they have questions, they can reach out, but please start with your children's digital safety. That I beg you.
Yeah, wonderful. I totally agree. Okay, Jenny, do you have anything else you want to add or to close this out, or what do you think?
Well, so just really quick, if we can do it real quick, I'm curious about what you think about video games, because I know that a lot of these video games, people are talking back and forth. Do you see a lot of this happening with video game usage as well? Obviously, social media we talked about, but video games.
Yeah, definitely. Social media and gaming apps and anything with live streams are genuinely very unsafe for children. I'm the most chill person you'll ever meet, and I just need you to know I'm not dramatizing this, right? But people who do the work that I do, like, please do not give your child unlimited, unsupervised access to the internet. Roblox is a very concerning one, and there's a lot of other very concerning apps and games. There's not one that I would consider necessarily safe, but there are definitely ones that I consider much more predatory. So I have a list of very dangerous apps on my website. There's a pretty long list, so get ready. But I'm asking you to please not have these apps on your children's devices. If they are going to play a game like Fortnite or Roblox or whatever it is, I'm literally asking you to sit there with them. I want you to also get your child's world, because if you're not aware of who they're talking to and the messages they're sending and receiving, then you don't know your child. So at the very least, if they must have access to the internet, if the internet must have access to your child, don't let them face it alone.
That's good. I'm like gonna go check their stuff right now.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Well, yeah, thank you.
Overwhelmed.
I am. I'm like,
oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kim, for coming on today. This has been a great conversation, and for bringing awareness to, all these problems that are really difficult to face, but we have to face them, or the problem, just go away. We have to bring awareness to it. And especially, if you are working with children, or you're a parent, or you have nieces and nephews or grandchildren, like you want to be aware of these things. And we just really appreciate you coming on today and just showing us and telling us what we can be looking for and how we can get involved and help with the situation. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being one of the few platforms that are willing to talk about this.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes.
And one of the few Christians, for that matter, Jenny. Seriously, it
right.
matters. Well, real quick note to end us out. For the Christians who wonder why more people aren't Christians, be the type of Christian that you want people to see the example of. There are very few out there, so thank you for being one of them.
Aww.
Healing is a process, a journey to be experienced, not just a destination.
You are not alone in this. It's okay to take your time, explore different perspectives, and find what resonates with you. Healing takes courage, and we believe in you.
Together, we can enjoy the ride.